Hey crafty friends, it's Joy here for Honeybee Stamps. Today I created a sympathy card using some easy techniques with texture paste and with ink. So I want to start with the texture paste first. I'm just going to spread this over my whole background. I don't want it to be really thick, but I do want some thicker areas, so it doesn't need to be like completely smoothed out. And I want it rough looking because we're going to make an impression with the stencil. So instead of putting your stencil on the cardstock and then putting your texture paste over it, I am putting the texture paste on my whole A2 size card panel, and then we're just going to take the stencil, and this is the Salvaged brick stencil, and I just want some of the impression. I don't even want the impression over the whole area. But what will happen is the thicker areas of texture paste will grab onto the impression from your stencil. And so now you can see we have some little areas of brick. If you wanted more, you could press more firmly, but I only did a little bit. Then I'm using the Lovely Layers Greenery. I'm just using one of these leaves. I'm going to die cut that, I think I did 12 times. And then I'm also using the Lovely Layers Tulips. There are 3 flowers. I die cut all of them. I ended up not using the big one. So I did die cut 2 of the medium-sized flower and then 3 of the smaller closed flowers. So what I'm going to do with my ink here is I'm smushing it onto my work surface. I do have a little bit of water. So I want to dilute some of this ink and just put a quick layer down on the background and then dip my paintbrush into the darker area because now my cardstock is a little bit wet. So dipping my paintbrush into that darker area and just adding some darker spots on my leaf. Kind of, I don't want to say it's like watercolor, but kind of, because it's not this perfect colored image. I want there to be a variance between dark and light. Then I am using Spun Sugar Distress Oxide ink for the medium-sized flower, but it's the larger flower on our card here. I am, again, diluting some of that color, painting that whole background, then going into the darker color and then just adding it to some areas. And as you can see, I am not even being picky about it. I really want it to be organic feeling and not on purpose, so it's not going to be in the same spot everywhere. So again, that lighter color and then coming in with a little bit of that darker color. Once my ink gets a little too saturated with water, I just wipe off my surface, add more fresh ink, add more water, and then just go into that same thing. So you can see here I'm adding really a lot of areas that have some darker pink, but you still have some lighter areas. Then for the next color of flower, I am using Shaded Lilac Distress Oxide inks. So I'm going to press that on my work surface, and I'm going to do that for the smaller tulips, and I'm going to do that for both of those. So this is just a really quick and easy way to color these, but then it's not this solid color either, and you have a little bit of interest to your die cut images. You're using the same kind of inks. You're not ink blending, which I personally love ink blending, but I just think this is a fun and different way just to get a different look on your die cuts. So let's finish up that little guy there. Then here is our greenery, our Lovely Layers Greenery that we die cut at the beginning. So I am taking a bigger paintbrush, doing that same concept of just wiping on the color, a lighter color. I am not being neat about it. I also don't mind if there's tiny bits of white spots. I actually like that. Then I'm coming in with darker ink here and a different smaller paintbrush, and then you can see I'm just kind of adding some darker areas. And again, I am not being particular about it. I want it to be organic. So I just want it to not be planned out. So it is very, very random. So I am using some Simon Says stamp inks in Celery and Spring. Nope, excuse me. Spring and Tide Pool. The first color of leaves at the beginning, that was with Celery. Here is the Tide Pool ink. So again, painting lightly. I'm not using watercolor cardstock. I'm just using Nina. They're not getting soaking wet, so it was totally fine. And I actually liked that when they dried, they kind of bent up a little bit, which I think is perfect for a card like this because we're going to create a wreath and this is going to give us some dimension. So let's clean off that saturated ink. Let's get some darker ink now. I still will add a little bit of water because I want it to be able to move around. And then again, just in random areas, adding some darker ink. And I just think they turned out so pretty. I love this. I did not use all, I think I used 8 of the 10 sprigs that I die cut, but I do tend to over die cut because I want to make sure I have enough and not have to go back and repeat all of these steps. That would just drive me nutty. Okay, let's finish our last one here. And this is also giving our background time to dry. Let's adhere our lovely layers. Tulips, this is that medium-sized one, and you can just see on the right side there, that little piece is going to line up nicely. This piece will line up with that as well. And as you can see, I only add glue at the bottom of my die cuts when I'm adhering my lovely layers. I don't want everything like completely smushed down because the top part is going to pull away from the back layer. And I like that look. To me, that just gives it more dimension. Let's pop that other guy in place here, and then I will show you how we put that small bud together. So there's 3 pieces to this one. You have your medium piece that I'm going to adhere to that back larger piece. And then we have this tiny little piece that goes on the front. And I was just making sure that I was going to put that in the right area. So again, adding a little bit of glue at the bottom of that die cut. And then putting that in place. Let's add our leaves to make our wreath. So I am starting with the green color, not the turquoise color. And I want this to be a half circle. I actually do end up flipping the card around. This was my original way I was gonna have the wreath, but if you saw the photos, it's flipped the other way, which is absolutely not a big deal. And I'm adding a little bit of glue at the base of these dies because I want the tips to be lifted up because that will give you just dimension without having to add any foam adhesive, so it actually will flatten in the card. But I like to do this. Now I'm going over top, overlapping with that teal color leaf. And then I'm pushing it to the side so you can see the green ones underneath as well. So here's where I flipped it around. I'm going to adhere 2 of those buds to the stems, and then I have a bunch of greenery that we did. I don't end up using it all. I had no idea how much I was going to use, so again, I over die cut. And I'm just going to lay out all my flowers here to see how I want this to look. So I made a sympathy card from this. My original thought was going to be an Easter card, and then I remembered I needed a sympathy card. And so this design really will work for almost anything. I think this could even be a beautiful wedding card. So, you know, you could take this design and just apply it however you need to. So I want to add a little bit of greenery. Now these leaves actually go to the part of the die that's the stem with the leaves, but obviously I'm not using the big stem, so I am just modifying where these leaves go. So this one's going to have 2 of those leaves on the outside. And I like that this greenery had a different color green, so it pops with the flowers compared to the greenery that's part of our wreath. This tulip will be popped up with foam adhesive. The other one just had some liquid glue and tucked into that wreath. This bud will have some foam adhesive. This other bud will also have foam adhesive. And then that last little purple bud, I'm just going to tuck under that flower there. First I thought I wanted it behind the greenery, but then I said no. Then I want to tuck in some more greenery. Those bigger leaves I do trim down, obviously, because they're ginormous. And I'm just going to use the tips of them so it looks like it's a different leaf than the other ones that were already die cut that were smaller. So I'm trimming those off and tucking those in with some liquid glue. And that is coming together so nicely. I decided that on both ends it needed to be a little bit thicker. So I'm going to add another turquoise leaf here, and I do have the bottom or the tip of it kind of overlapping that tulip, and then I trimmed down another one that's going to go on the opposite end, and that is a green one, excuse me. Now let's do some splatter. I am using black soot Reinker, and a paintbrush, and I am just splattering, trying to keep most of it concentrated on the flowers and the wreath part. It is going to get on the other side, which is fine. I'm also going to do it with the shaded lilac and the spun sugar. And I think the splatter turned out so lovely, and I just think it added a lot to this. But you can opt out of that if splatter is not your thing. Now for the sentiments, I am using the Inside Sentiments Comfort because this is meant for somebody. The outside sentiment says, "My deepest sympathy." And then on the inside of my card panel, which I don't usually stamp until I'm going to give it to someone, I have two of them. One says, "Death leaves a heartache no one can heal. Love leaves a memory no one can steal." And it says, "I am praying for your peace and comfort." So that's going to be inside. And then I'm using the coordinating dies for the scripty sentiments, and this is going to be on the front of the card. So I'm going to tape those in place and run that through the die cut machine. And of course, I'm going to add some foam adhesive behind my sentiments. And I'm also adding 2 dots of liquid glue because I have that texture paste on the background. I really want to make sure that my sentiments are not going to fall off. And I also have to make sure that I actually remove the release paper from one of the sentiments, and I did not. So add 2 more dots of glue. So your foam adhesive will adhere it down, and then your liquid glue will hold it in place. And here is that finished card. I think it turned out so lovely. I'm really happy with this. I think it's just absolutely stunning with all of those lovely layers dies. Thank you guys so very much for stopping by and watching. I hope that you feel inspired by this project, and I hope you have a wonderful day.